Okay, we might as well get started. Now, it seems as though we've almost got prospective year 11s, prospective year 12s. Interesting division. For the benefit of those who don't know what theory of knowledge is, I want to give you a bit of background. You might think that the name theory of knowledge is a strange and complicated name, but I want to tell you that ever since you began thinking, you were using the principles that we explored in theory of knowledge. Every waking moment of your life, you are involved with knowledge. You are shaped by knowledge. So knowledge is a part of your life continuously. It may even be a part of your life when you're asleep. I might ask the question, and this might have made a good oral for the purposes of this presentation, and for the purposes of this day. Do you know when you're asleep? Oh, you would prefer me over here, Mr. Steele. Sorry, I'm just not fond of lecterns. So, you go from class to class. You go into a geography class, you learn certain things there. You go into a maths class, you learn certain things there. You go into a history class, learn certain things there. You might well have asked the question, how are all these forms of knowledge related? What do they mean for me as a person? You use knowledge all the time. You know how to tie up your shoelaces. You know your friends. You know how to make your way around Adelaide. All of these kinds of knowledge are related in particular ways. And in TOK, we explore that relationship. So, if I say to you, knowledge shapes us all in all our waking moments, I want to suggest to you that knowledge is a strange and marvellous affair. And if you have eyes to see it, you will see that it is a marvellous affair. You might, for example, come across a friend and make an arrangement with them. A friend says to you, we'll meet at such and such a place and such a time. I want to ask you, how do you know they'll be there? How do you know that you'll be there? A friend makes this claim and you think to yourself, well, he's made both a promise and a prediction, two different kinds of knowledge. And you will assess them in different ways. One of the ways you might assess them is simply to look into the eyes of your friend and think, is he serious? Another way might be, well, I know this friend of mine and I know he's notoriously unreliable. So his promise and his prediction that he will be there isn't as trustworthy, perhaps, as another friend of mine. It may be that, like me, you have watched nature documentaries and you've heard narrators say, with great conviction, this rock is 600 million years old. Now, when I see that, I always ask myself, how do they know? How can they be sure? I mean, we have ways of measuring that, but we can only test those ways in very small, relatively small spans of time. So, saying a rock is 600 million years is a huge claim. Tiny little fraction of time we can test it. Huge extension of that claim to say 600 million years. Another example I might give you is recently we sent a probe to land on a comet. Now think of that. Think of all the kinds of knowledge that were involved in sending that probe to land on that comet. Now, the scientists who did it, they had a knowledge of mathematics. They knew how to calculate. They had a knowledge of astronomy. They had a knowledge of gravitational forces. They had a knowledge of engineering. And they knew that all of those forms of knowledge had limitations. And what's more, they knew that they couldn't be sure how all of those forms of knowledge would come together. Another thing they knew is that human beings make mistakes. So, I think it tells you what an extraordinary subject TOK is, that when that probe landed on that satellite, all of the scientists whooped it because they knew the limitations of knowledge. They knew what they didn't know. And they knew that knowledge is, as I say, a strange and marvellous affair. And hopefully, if you have eyes to see it, you will see those marvels if you study theory of knowledge. Okay, in terms of what we're about to do today, what these students are asked to do is show how theory of knowledge relates to your lives, to the situations you find yourself in. What they're going to do is they're going to identify a situation in which they've found themselves, and they are going to extract from that situation a question, what we call a knowledge question, that is a more general aspect of the situation in which they found themselves, and their analysis is intended to show how the ideas we explore in TOK are related to the practical circumstances of our lives. And the focus of their analysis is to assess the quality of knowledge with respect to their question. And so what they're asking is, what they're trying to do is not answer the question that they ask. They will identify in the course of their orals a knowledge question. What they're trying to do is not answer that question, because that would take them much longer than 10 minutes. What they're trying to help us understand is, how well can that question be answered? How well can it be answered? So that's the focus, is what we would call evaluating knowledge, saying this is how reliable, how accurate, how well prepared the knowledge is that we can draw on to answer the question that they ask. They will be given individually 10 minutes each. Rishi, who's timing them, will say, after 10 minutes, 1 minute to go. We give them 1 minute grace because we know that technology can play strange tricks on us. So, if some material takes a while to download or whatever, I think it's only fair that 11 minutes is, in effect, the 10 minutes that they're permitted. And there's going to be one team oral, and they will have 20 minutes to present. After the orals, I would encourage all who are present, because we are all involved in these issues, all of us, so far as we're humans, we're involved in knowledge, to ask questions or make comments as you see fit. With that, I think I've said enough, probably too much, and I will ask Cale to come up and present his paper. Checking that works. No, it works. Yep. Okay, cool.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Cale Amos, and today I will be giving you my TOK oral on the idea of instinct. Right. Firstly, to begin with my real-life situation, which is fear of the dark, I was thinking, okay, fear of the dark, is it instinctive for us to be afraid of the dark? And if it is, well, what exactly is instinct? Then from this, I thought, okay, well, from where then does instinct draw knowledge? And this ultimately led to my knowledge question, which is, how reliable is the notion of instinct in our understanding of knowledge? Now, in order to look at this question, different knowledge issues arise, and some that I've identified are as follows. We can see here, 1, what is instinct? 2, from what sources does the idea of instinct come? And 3, how do we use the idea of instinct? Now, coming to the first issue, what is instinct? So what is it that causes sea turtles, as soon as they hatch, to know, okay, that they need to head straight for the ocean? That's where they belong when they've only just started life. They have no prior experience for them to know this. So how do we define what this thing is, instinct? Well, it depends on a variety of different things, as we can see here, from person to person. And each person has a different cultural background, different education, might have their jobs are different, which give them different view of how they perceive things. So therefore, different definitions can come about. And some examples of these definitions I looked up on the British Dictionary, and to show you how there's a variety. One of them, or 3, is an inborn or natural intuitive power. 2, the innate capacity of an animal to respond to a given stimulus in a relatively fixed way. And 3, a natural and apparently innate aptitude. Now, in order to show to you the differences in these definitions, I'd like to point out that the second one is probably more related to the natural sciences, or biologist's point of view, in that it's saying instinct is fixed in that species. It's predetermined. That knowledge is predetermined. There's no background knowledge which helps them to come to this instinctive decision or thought. However, intuition is probably it's immediate, like instinct. However, it's not predetermined. It's a sudden realization that yes, here's the solution to my problem. It's not unique to a species, rather the individual and their situation. Now, so from this we can see that language plays a role in our definition here, and depending on what the language is, how the language is used, we can different outcomes are sourced. For example, coming back to my definition with intuition, it raises the question whether they rightly couple intuition with instinct, because intuition is more. It's saying it's an inborn thing, which isn't exactly true. As I've just said, intuition comes about to us in a sudden moment. It's an enlightenment. So that seems to mislead us and pose the question whether language can accurately depict instinct. And because there's all these different definitions, how can we gain an accurate answer? How do we know which of these definitions is perhaps the most accurate? So from this, I've continued to think about it, and to a better way of understanding how we can answer this question could be through, can we actually readily distinguish instinct from other kinds of knowledge? And for us to do this, we must first understand what kind of knowledge instinctive knowledge is in order to distinguish it from others. But because there's this ambiguity between definitions and different perspectives, then how can we understand the kind of knowledge to which instinct relates if we don't have a clear definition of it in the first place? So as an example of distinguishing these kinds of knowledge, we look at instincts. Knowledge from instinct is related to science because it's repeatable. And if something's repeatable, then it's generally scientific. And I'll show you here how, for example, when babies know to go to their mother's breast to source food, that's repeated generation after generation. That's instinctive. That's scientific. However, intuitive knowledge is related to an emotion. It's a feeling. And it's not repeatable because they have their own unique circumstances. And so we can see here how a distinction has been made, and hence some validity has been restored to how we can answer this question. Whereas before, because as I showed how language can limit our understanding of instinct, seeing as we might not be able to give an accurate definition, here this to some degree shows how it can be distinguished, even though there's ambiguity. On to my next knowledge issue. From what sources of knowledge does the idea of instinct come? Now, there's, as examples, there's science and religion. In science, you might source it from evolution, natural selection through different DNA being passed down from generation. And from this point of view, the person might think, okay, nature it's not necessarily all-knowing, it's just cause and effect. So instinct here that's been passed down isn't necessarily the absolute best way or source of knowledge that an organism can use. It's just the most useful way. Whereas if you look at it from a religious point of view, those people may think, okay, if instinct is perhaps from a divine mind, a divine being who instills this knowledge, instinctive knowledge, into us, and therefore it's completely reliable because they think, okay, divine being is all-knowing, they know everything they tell us is completely 100% accurate, so they would think it's completely reliable in terms of understanding the knowledge related to instinct because it's from a divine being. And ultimately here we can see how these different sources and understandings give a difficulty in how we answer this knowledge question, because there's different perspectives, and how do we know which is more valid, which makes the better distinction or identifies the most correct source. I mean, how do we know what is if there is a correct source? If we're not all-knowing, it's hard for us to tell which will help us best in finding how reliable instinct is in our understanding of knowledge, which was my knowledge question. So ultimately, perhaps we can't really find out the better perspective or the better origin, and so limitations are formed in relation to the reliability of our understanding of knowledge when we think of it in relation to instinct. And if we can't understand it, then does that mean that we don't understand some knowledge and behaviours? Perhaps. Furthermore, how do we use instinct? Well, in some courts of law, psychiatrists use instinct and say for people who are being accused of murder might have an instinct to for murder. It's determined by the biochemistry of the brain and so on and so forth. But if this is so, I want to ask you, firstly, how reliable is the scientific method in determining this? Can we actually examine all the relevant factors within the brain which might give rise to instinct? And if we can, this will be open to interpretation depending on the scientist who's looking at it, and they have their different definitions, as I've just gone through earlier in the presentation. So that gives some variety in there. And also, because we don't completely understand the brain, and so our medical knowledge is limited, how accurate can these examinations be if we don't completely understand how the brain interacts with other parts, if that knowledge is limited? So in which case, should instinct be considered as a defense in a court of law? Now, coming back to my real-life situation, I began to think, okay, well, perhaps it isn't actually... perhaps it isn't really instinctive to be afraid of the dark, because for something to be instinctive, it doesn't have a logical process, so we don't think, okay, here's a few people in front of me, so I'm in the presence of other human beings, I need to act in certain ways, I have logical processes of social norms and so forth. But in instinct, there's no prior knowledge, there's no logical process which instills these decisions. And for us to be afraid, well, do we need to be knowledgeable about that, about something to be afraid of it? So, like through the tales of the boogie monster and so forth, that's prior knowledge or memory, which we use to say, okay, perhaps, okay, that's scary, I'm afraid of that. So maybe being afraid of the dark isn't instinctive because there seems to be that logical reasoning or prior knowledge used there. And so if one situation isn't instinctive, which we previously thought was, does that mean that there are others which we used to think was instinctive but really aren't? So then that could undermine our whole understanding of of knowledge in relation to those situations. Hang on. Okay, so in conclusion, I'd like to talk about the implications this might have on human self-awareness and our scientific knowledge of other creatures. Well, but basically, what does this mean in how or why we behave? Does it mean that perhaps babies and animals are largely instinctive in their behaviours because they don't have as much prior knowledge? Well, that's very hard for us to measure, but it's something which we can think about because, they don't have the prior knowledge, they don't have as wide a knowledge base. And furthermore, if we don't completely understand instinct, then does this mean that we don't completely understand ourselves and how we act? Because if say, we take the perspective of the religious source, then does that mean that it's the divine being in control of our instinctive actions, and in which case we're not actually, that's not due to our mind at all, it's this divine mind. So ultimately the reliability of instinct changes on how we define it, from what source it comes, and because we don't understand it or we're not sure as to how to define it, then does that mean we don't understand the reliability of the knowledge it gives to us? Well, perhaps it does. So, thank you.